Hello, hello. Thank you so much for your time this morning. My name is Atlas Hernandez. This session is being recorded, so please kindly put yourself on mute. Otherwise, Catherine will do me the favor of muting you. So thank you so much for being here. This is the Washington Youth and Families Funding Session Q&A for the project Serving Families. And before I get started, I'd like to give a big thank you, shout out, recognition to the people who assisted me with bringing forth this presentation today and who are assisting me throughout this process and who will assist me throughout the grant. So today we will be joined by Bree Quadaker, our contracts manager, Miranda Vargas, our senior health strategy specialist, who will be taking notes and reviewing the chat. So if throughout this informational you are already ready with your questions, please go ahead and pop them in the chat. Miranda's going to do her best to sift those out and have them prepared for the last section of this presentation. Kaylin Yasutake is our Director of Research and Evaluation. She's going to be covering what information is covered and what you need to know. Catherine Bicknell, our Communication Specialist. Without Catherine, I would not have been here. So thank you so much, Catherine. All right, let's get started.
We do have a couple of people trickling in, so maybe start slow there, Alice.
Okay, yeah.
Maybe we might need like 1 more minute just to make sure that everybody in the waiting room is able to get in.
Absolutely, we can noodle for another minute, no worries. While we noodle, I'll go over the agenda. So again, welcome everyone. Today, we're not going to get into the nitty-gritty of the application, hoping that you have all had time to read the application and form your questions. And if that's not the case, we can always hold a knowledge cafe so we can go through the application together. But I'm going to tell you today a little bit about building changes in the Washington Youth and Families Fund. We're going to go a little bit over the funding overview. We'll talk about the 2024 to 2027 family strategy and application review and timeline, and then we'll head into Q&A. Catherine, should we still noodle?
Nope, I think you're good. The waiting room looks good.
Okay, awesome. Okay. A little bit more about building changes. Whoops. Sorry about that, y'all. Building changes uses an interdisciplinary approach to make change at a system and local level. We are able to fund and try out new strategies and services, conduct research about how they work, and influence policy and advocate so these solutions and greater resources are adopted for our homeless and housing systems. We do work in the housing and homeless response, education, and health systems, grounded in racial equity, with the acknowledgement that many Black, Indigenous, and people of the global majority experience disparities in outcomes throughout these systems. These disparities impact the well-being, health, and economic opportunities for families and youth and young adults in interconnected ways. And our goal is to help our communities have equitable solutions so that they can thrive. So again, our vision is communities thrive when people have safe and stable housing and can equitably access and use services. And a little bit more on that is communities thrive when communities lead those services and inform those services, which is really what how I got here today in this space and how I continue to show up in communities. Okay, I'd like to read for you our Building Changes Racial Equity Statement. At BC, we hold ourselves accountable for addressing racism and discrimination. Black, Indigenous, and people of the global majority disproportionately experience homelessness due to historical and systematic racism. We cannot address homelessness without addressing racism at its roots and the trauma it continues to perpetuate. We set universal goals to end homelessness and pursue targeted solutions to achieve these goals. Our work in race equity does not stop here. We are committed to building an internal culture that challenges racism within our organization. So, what is WOOF? WOOF is a public-private partnership to fund nonprofits, tribes, social service providers, agencies to provide housing-based services and financial assistance to families in Washington. Those experiencing homelessness and housing instability. So WOOF is administered by BC through a contract with the Department of Commerce, and we've been around since 2004 with this contract. We've held this contract for quite some time, and we've put over 60 million with 122 projects in 26 counties across the state. So that's a big reach. We recognize that housing instability and homelessness looks unique depending on community, and that young people face specific barriers to accessing safe and stable housing. So that's young people and families. That being said, we report on specific outcomes relating to housing statuses and length of time accessing services. We've seen that WOOF can be an extremely useful tool in promoting new things and innovations that help an organization demonstrate capacity to access larger public dollars. This being the case, we try to prioritize new orgs for our funding or projects that really reflect something new or an iteration on something that is new. Again, communities know their communities best, and when community is informing that strategy and leading that strategy, it can look really different. Something that I have said time and time again throughout my time at Building Changes is that communities have been given a problem by being displaced, by being under-resourced, by having zero community, and they are expected to be okay with the solution given to them by people outside of their community. And then when it doesn't work, there's a shock, there's a surprise. Why? The community didn't lead that initiative, so why is there a shock that it's not working? The goal here is really to put amplification back to community-led strategies by and for. Okay, so what I imagine a lot of you came here for today, the funding opportunity. So in this cycle, about 1.97 million will be distributed for projects serving families. The goal is to fund between 2 and 4 family grants, depending on how review goes through the community, for how the community review panelists organize and what is the strategy and what will make the most impact. So it is a 3-year funding cycle, and it beginning in 2024, going to 2027. There are annual lump sum distributions. So this is something as soon as the contract is signed, first payment goes out. Both indirect and direct costs are eligible. And programmatic reporting is required for fiscal monitoring. So who is eligible for this? Oops. Nonprofits, communities, and neighborhood-based or regional statewide housing assistance agencies, federally recognized tribes, local housing authorities, and public development authorities. Culturally specific orgs or smaller-led orgs and staffed by people of color are encouraged to apply. And we strive for statewide geographic diversity. And on the next slide, I'm actually going to invite Bree Quadaker to give us a little bit more information about compliance. And I'm so sorry, there's something in my way. Compliance and grant contracting. So I will move it on over.
Hi, everyone. So I just wanted to give you kind of a general overview of what it would look like if you are awarded a WOOF grant with Building Changes, starting with the actual grant contract itself and putting that together, as well as what's expected over the life of the grant in terms of reporting and compliance. So, once the awards are made, the first thing we would do with each organization is what's called a financial risk assessment. And based on your organization type, like a nonprofit or tribe, we'll ask for financial documents to complete this FRA. And it generally includes, your most recent 990 audited financial statements and some year-to-date financials. We know that, some smaller, newer organizations maybe don't have audited financials, which is okay, you can still apply. We just might ask for some different financial documents to do this risk assessment. And the same for tribes. We know that tribes, don't file a 990, so that would not be a requirement in that instance. The next thing we ask for is a grantee contact list. So this is just contact information for who will be in touch with from your organization about the grant. For example, your primary contact, who's going to be signing documents, financial report contact, program report contact, and program staff. We also realize that staff might change over the life of the grant, so that can always be updated, but we like to have that initial contact list so we know from the start who we need to be in touch with. The next piece is once that financial risk assessment is done and the contract grant or the grantee contact list is collected, we'll start putting together the actual grant contract documents. So we'll work with you to put together the scope of work and the grant budget that will be included with the grant template. And the budget might change from what was, submitted with your proposal. And as a note, we refer to the consolidated housing grant guidelines for allowable expenses and indirect costs, which are generally limited to 15% of the budget. There is some flexibility with the guidelines. It's just something that we need to have a conversation about before anything gets approved or changed. And then also within the grant contract, your reporting requirements will be outlined. So we require quarterly financial reports, and the report template is based on the budget that is approved with the grant, and also twice yearly narrative reports that ask a series of questions about how the program is going. There's also some flexibility with how we do the narrative report. Generally, it's a document that you fill out on your own, but in the past, I've had phone calls or Zoom calls with grantees if writing out that narrative report proves to be too time consuming. So it's more of a conversation than a report that's being submitted to us. And then as Atlas mentioned, the payments are split up over the 3 years of the grant and based on what was budgeted for each of the 3 years. So the first payment would be released once the grant contract is signed, and then releasing the next payments is they're scheduled for every year, but they're also dependent on how you're doing with spending. So if your financial reports show that you're spending slower than anticipated, we might hold that next grant payment until you're more spent down. But we're also a very hands-on organization, so we'll be in a lot of communication with you all. So it's not going to be a surprise. We'll be talking about these things throughout the life of the grant. And the last piece I want to talk about are monitoring site visit. So every grantee will be monitored over the life of the 3 years of this WOOF grant cycle, where we'll do a site visit and take a closer look at the inner workings of your program and financials. This is a compliance piece of the Commerce grant that we receive, but we also try to think of it as an opportunity to find areas where we can help strengthen your organization. So those are the larger pieces. There's a lot of information there, but again, we'll be in close communication with you if you are awarded a WOOF grant to get these things in order. I'm going to pass it back to Atlas.
Thank you so much, Bree. Your presenting voice and voice in general is so relaxing, so you just soothed me there. Thank you so much. I should have spoken to you before this. And next, I'll invite Kaylin to speak about the main evaluation outcomes for this grant and project.
Great. So I'm Kaylin. I support the grant through evaluation. I also help with some technical assistance and HMIS questions as best as we're able to. In terms of this grant, again, it is a Department of Commerce, a statewide grant. So there are specific benchmarks that they want to look at. And the 4 that they specifically look at are the ones below. These are done annually and reported back to the Department of Commerce. We actually pull that information from HMIS. So the only requirement is that you continue to use HMIS and enter in the normal information you would through HMIS, and then we'll pull the data annually end of fiscal year and report it back to the Department of Commerce. For those that are unaware, HMIS is the Homeless Management Information System. It is a requirement through this grant that you use this. It doesn't mean you have to be on it currently. We have had grantees who have not been on it or not have access to it and gotten access in the first year. It's a nationwide electronic record system that is information gathering about case management. So it's used throughout the nation, and then it is within your county that use it. So we usually work with the grantee to outline that requirement. For those that don't have access or use it, we sort of begin the conversation with you and the people who oversee HMIS to gain access, and things like that. So just to note, building changes does not just do those four measurements. Through this grant, we've had a variety of different types of work in housing. And so to provide a more accurate and impactful picture of the work that you're doing, we try to provide both other quantitative data, so looking at it by different racial and ethnic groups, looking at income changes, if your program is specific on employment, for example. We also add in qualitative data. Some of our newer projects have smaller targets that they're trying to target a smaller amount of families that they're trying to assist. And so, geez. And so essentially, we try to provide that qualitative piece as we think it helps with the storytelling and the impact that your work does. And so we pull that from the narrative reports that Bree and Atlas have sort of touched on, that happen twice a year. We also sit in on the regular learning circles to kind of hear if there are specific ongoing issues or trends that we're hearing. One of the ones that we've often reported on has been the landscape of housing post-pandemic. That's hit all of our cohorts, that there is low availability and very high rental rates. And then other data from HMIS. So that's just to show that the evaluation, hopefully, and the reporting is more comprehensive and includes a way in which to show impact. And then that is that.
Thank you so much, Kaylin. And I feel like those are the two scariest portions of the grant. Like what data is being captured, and then what is the contracting process like? And I'm very fortunate to work alongside two brilliant individuals who are so kind in the explanation of what is necessary, because these systems are not always fun or built to meet our needs. Speaking of meeting our needs, the family strategy aims to put resources towards supporting families to gain safe and stable housing. The focus is on cultural restorative services for immigrants and refugees who are Black, Indigenous, and people of the global majority, with a holistic outcome that includes community-led healing, access to culturally competent nutrition, and information and access regarding COVID-19. When I was editing this strategy, it felt a lot like I wanted to add more and more and more, so very kitchen sink status. And had it not been for communications sitting me down and being like, hey, we need to pick one, we wouldn't have had the conversation of like, how do I pick one in this little hellscape blender when everything and more is what is bogging down our communities and a hindrance to safe and stable housing. So if y'all read the application and were like, geez, this is very kitchen sink, I don't know if we're going to be able to do all this all, that wasn't the goal. The goal was just to be able to provide an expansive list of what could be possible and of what healing has looked like up until this point and what healing can continue to look like. So if culturally responsive access to nutrition looks something different for your community, then I want to know that. I grew up on these services in Redmond and in Bellevue on the east side, and we stayed there throughout my young adult life because we were able to navigate housing, health, and education services. I say we, but it was me as an 8-year-old interpreting to an adult who only knew Spanish. And as I reflect on my experiences with these programs, and now that I am a gatekeeper for these programs and for these funds, I am starting to connect the dots of the things that I missed out on, or things that were robbed from me because the services were not culturally competent and there wasn't community input. the target population for this, the focus on the strategy is on families enrolled or receiving housing services such as rapid rehousing, diversion, or hotel and motel assistance, families experiencing homelessness, families at risk of homelessness, and families interested in healing services and families made up of immigrants and refugees who are Black, Indigenous, and people of the global majority. So what does this timeline look like? The applications are due Monday, March 4th, and then after they are submitted, I will meet with our community review panel made up of other people who are in community, who represent Black, Indigenous, and people of the global majority who are immigrants and refugees. While I do have a plan of doing it within 3 weeks, the world laughs at me when I make plans sometimes. So it is very vaguely stated as the review paneling process will be done through March, with awards being awarded through the beginning and mid-April, and contracts in place for May 2024. Okay, oops. Okay, yes. So there is an online form assembly that is required for this application, and that can be found online. You can feel free to copy and paste this link. It is also found in the application. It is hyperlinked. The frequently asked questions and recording will be posted next week. So that will be available for y'all to review and rewatch in this upcoming week. Again, the application deadline is Monday, March 4th. And with that, we head into questions. Thank you so much for being here this morning and for listening to me talk at you.
Atlas, what's the best way for me to get you questions? Would you want me to copy and paste them to you or just ask them out loud?
You can copy and paste them to, oh, actually, you know what? I lied to you. I would like you to read them out loud to me.
Sure. This question is from Michelle Majors. On page 14 of the RFP, it says, be mindful of the word count associated with the written application under the video submission instructions. On page 15, I'm only seeing for written responses, ... a maximum of 10 pages, and nothing more about length of responses or margin spacing, etc. Could you clarify whether there is a word count I'm not seeing, whether it is applied to the individual questions, and whether you have any spacing requirement?
Okay, Michelle, on your P's and Q's. I love this. So to my knowledge, there is not a word count requirement. My recommendation on this would be to, if you need several paragraphs to do your explanation, then do what is necessary. I also do not believe, and I will get more information on this and reach out to you to give you a clear answer. But to my knowledge, I don't believe that there is a word count that you're not seeing. And I also don't believe that there are any spacing requirements. Because this will be done on an online form assembly, you'll be limited to the capacity of like those spacing requirements within the text box. But I don't believe it'll cut you off for a word count, because it'll allow for up to 10 pages. I say this, up to 10 pages in quote marks, because I don't actually know what the word count would be for 10 pages.
Yeah. Can I, is it okay to come in here with a question?
Oh, sure. Yeah, what is your question?
Yeah, I'm actually on this call from West Africa. So I mean, it might be Port Network, but well, when I read the RFP information from the call, it says that 2 to 4 organizations are targeted to be contracted for this, and I'm wondering if this is a statewide grant. I mean, if 2 or 4 organizations are selected, maybe 2, what happened to the small guy? I mean, small organizations like BIPOGM organization may not really consider. We've been through this before. When very small organizations are identified, it ends up with the big guy, and the people that really are the people that are hurting. that are experiencing homelessness and people that have been racially discriminated, that have been going all these problems don't even get considered because it's only 4 people and the big guy get given the grant and the small people that really are people that are going through the program don't get considered. So I mean, this is my worry, and my worry always comes to be true. So it's rather unfortunate.
And just to make sure I'm understanding your question, if I could repeat it back to you and get some clarity, are you curious about the likelihood of a smaller organization being selected with the statewide process?
Correct, because it only says 2 or 4 organizations, and a lot of time a lot of time it will happen. It ends up going to the big guys and the small organizations like the BIPOGM organization don't even get considered. So that is my worry.
Okay.
You don't want to spend hours writing these grants and ends up not getting considered. So yeah, that's exactly what I was saying.
Okay, thank you so much, Momodo. And to answer your question, it is limited between 2 and 4 applicants for this grant cycle, just because of the amount that we had. I don't actually know what the amount budgeted until we start receiving proposals. So in my mind, I parsed it out to like no more than 550, and that would allow anywhere between 2 and 4, so maybe 3 organizations. The primary focus would be to highlight immigrants and refugees of Black, Indigenous, and people of the global majority. We strive to have a statewide outreach, and the goal would be to amplify and also assist in capacity building and technical assistance with those smaller orgs that are for and by communities. So it is one of those things where if they meet all the marks, that's wonderful. But it also doesn't make sense for the strategy for maybe someone who is has a really big reach in King County and not doing work with immigrants and refugees. Was I able to answer your question?
Yeah, you were. I think every community is different, and if you come to our West African community, our situation is unique. We speak different languages, and our circumstances are different from. You can have a big organization taking care of refugees and immigrants, but they may not be able to relate culturally, be able to culturally provide for communities from West Africa. So you have organizations who are very specific, specialized culturally targeted programs for the communities they serve. So if let's say it's granted to an organization that works with immigrants and refugees, and maybe half of those are people from West Africa, the organization that is more qualified to serve the people from West Africa are not considered. So the people that demographic will not benefit from will not actually benefit from the grants. So this is my worry. We will end up being left out because the people that are awarded to implement the grant do not reach our people. And us, the people that, and we, the people that have the capacity and the culturally appropriate services to serve our people have not been considered.
Thank you, Mamodo. I didn't catch the last 2 words of that, but overall the sentiment that I'm understanding is most of the time people experiencing the need in community are left out of the conversation. That is a lot of what I spent my young adult life questioning, and what I spend a lot of time questioning now is who is in the room, who is not in the room, and who needs to be in the room. And that's what informs this strategy as well. So thank you for bringing that up. And Miranda, oh, go ahead.
I just had one quick thing to add, which is we keep talking about statewide. In terms of services, most of our grantees serve in one community, one county. Occasionally they'll go cross county, but those services are usually confined to one county. So we strive for outreach when we do, like, people can come into community and things like that. You don't need to have a statewide program.
Thank you for that clarification. That's right. You do not need to have a statewide program that expands throughout the state. That would be a large feat. Welcomed if that is your goal. But that would mean to say, like, if if there are, I don't know, I'm thinking very arbitrarily here. So like Okanawan County, which is not in King County, right? But it's still within the state of Washington. That is more of what the intention of the statewide funding is supposed to describe.
Yeah, I really don't want to keep us on this. Other people want to ask questions, but there is a repeated history of organizations like us being left out, especially when these grants like this nature have been published and been contracted. Or usually, it's organizations that are not us. That if you say you want to read the hardest hit people, the people that are really at the low bottom, then I think the best is to consider our approaches. But I mean, let's see what happens. Good luck with us, but there's a repeated history of small organizations being left out.
Thank you for that note, and I look forward to read your application. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Are you ready for another question?
Yes, please.
Okay, from Sharon Campos, budget is not described in the RFP. It does say on the budget sheet not to request more than 550,000. Is that in total for the 3 years?
That is not in total for the 3 years. That is that has been asked in order to be able to accommodate for anywhere from 2 to 4 grantees. That is the hope for this cohort, but let's say I never know, right? Because the applications aren't in just yet, but if an organization makes the ask for the full funding for the 3 years, it could so be that is the decision. Being that we do want to fund multiple organizations through this funding period, I chose anywhere between 500 and 550 for each yearly budget. Again, those are lump sum payments that come at once your contract is signed, and if throughout the process the organization decides that the strategy is moving in a different direction and requires different amount of funding, then we check in, we talk about that, and we revise the budget. Sharon, was I able to answer your question?
Yes, you did. I just wanted to make sure that when we do the budget, that it is the 550 max, you know, so to speak, per year and not in totality.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I think you touched on this a few minutes ago, but Rebecca Pagazzi asked, I'm sorry if I missed this earlier. How many awards are you giving? It sounded like you said earlier 2 to 4, just based on like the amount of money that can be divided among people.
Yeah, so based off of the 1.975 million and the ask to keep yearly budgets from 5 to 550, that would put us anywhere between 2 to 4. It could be 3. That'd be wonderful.
And then another question from Rebecca. My nonprofit serves a large number of newly arrived Ukrainian humanitarian parolees that don't fall within the BIPOGM definition. Would still be eligible to be served under this grant?
I'm so sorry. I want to make a really important correction to the previous funding answer that I gave, because I may have gravely misunderstood the math. And so thank you so much to my colleague Dimitri, who got in my chat box and let me know. But in totality, it would be 550,000. So to not exceed 550,000 for the course of 3 years. I apologize for that miscommunication and misinformation.
So that was to
Miranda.
Sharon's question.
Yes, and to the room.
Alice, if I may.
Yes,
Just,
you may.
Yes, thanks so much for the questions and the clarity on this. Apologize for jumping in here. Yeah, so we have almost $2 million available for this strategy for the family focus in the next 3 years. And so, yeah, with a cohort of between 2 to 4 organizations, right now shooting for $500,000 awards is really where we are at with that. In previous funding years, we've seen that that's actually also about the average that we get requested. We do have organizations on either end. And then we also have data to demonstrate, even at that amount, because these strategies are really intended to be focused, that it's a meaningful amount. We oftentimes struggle to actually have deal with underspend in the first 3 years. So just to kind of emphasize, as Atlas has been doing, develop proposals that are responsive to the strategy, and based on what is responsive, build your budget from there. And so that'll give us a foundation for Atlas to do the review with their community review panel to understand how much needs to be awarded.
Thank you. I really appreciate you popping in. And Rebecca, you were asking, your nonprofit serves a large number of newly arrived Ukrainian humanitarian parolees that don't fall within the BIPOGM definition. Would they still be eligible to be served under this grant? So this is primarily a grant to assist and prevent families from experiencing homelessness to acquire safe and stable housing. And above all, like, that is the mission. So while it does highlight immigrants and refugees of the BIPOGM community, so long as the application and the community served is responsive within the overall strategy, you definitely please consider applying. I understand that it is a big lift because it's a big application. However, you're still serving. I mean, if the intention is still to serve families to get them from homelessness to safe and stable housing, I don't see why not.
And just to ask a similar question that came later from Bree Hayden, does an organization exclusively need to serve BIPOGM in order to qualify? Which it sounds like no, as long as funding is directly targeted towards partnering with BIPOGM experiencing housing instability and homelessness.
Yeah, so it'll still be considered. However, the highlight is by and for. So by immigrants and refugees who are Black, Indigenous, and people of the global majority, for immigrants and refugees who are Black, Indigenous, people of the global majority, will be given, because that'll be given the highest consideration because that is a highlight. However, I still encourage you to apply.
Boop, boop, boop. Sorry, 1 second. Okay. Next question from Rebecca Dyer. If agencies have an approved federal indirect rate, would that be accepted, or is there a cap?
I'm tempted to ask our finance department head, who's right across from me. But what I believe is, it's capped at a 15% indirect rate. And yes, and I just got confirmation from our finance director that it is capped at a 15% indirect rate.
From Emil Pattison, an early slide said, oh, okay, never mind. We already covered this. 2 to 4 family grants. Got it. Okay, so from Ben Sedlock, based on your comments at the beginning and the emphasis on emerging healing services, are you only looking to fund innovations, new programs, and expansions, or are you open to sustaining long-running successful programs without funding?
It's a yes and situation. So if there is a new iteration or a new body of work for emerging needs of community, awesome. But if there has been work that has been being done and there is just no funds available, but it's working and it's serving community, definitely apply.
And second question from them, what kind of COVID services are you imagining? The community we serve was hit very hard, 1 in 3 impacted. Are you looking for connections to medical care related to long COVID, ongoing social services needs deepened by COVID?
I really like this question. Right now your name is escaping me, but thank you so much. And again, when I was revising this strategy, the only additions that were introduced were that the focus be on immigrants and refugees, that healing expand to what community needs determined access to COVID-19 information, behavioral health, and culturally competent nutrition. So I love those. And if that is what community needs and that is how the organization would like to guide their work, then that is what we're looking for.
Awesome. From Stephanie Sarantos, can you speak more about the flexible funds mentioned in the grant?
Yeah, so this grant does allow for flexible funding because we recognize that housing and immediate housing cost needs are not the only things that factor in to someone remaining safe and stably housed. How it's gone before is I communicate and check in with my grantees and I ask them, tell me what's going on. And if I'm being told that families experiencing housing instability and have young ones with developmental impairments or disabilities and their inability to be able to have safe transportation in and out of their home is a factor of contributing to why they were homeless prior or what will keep them housed, and the community decides this is an appropriate way to house them and to supplement this family to keep them safe and stably housed, then I will support that flexible funding initiative. So as long as we talk about it and it relates to the safe and stable housing of your family, it is really malleable.
Okay, next question from Audria Wool. I'm wondering if there is allowance for a portion of funding to go to capital. We are working on securing one of our longest standing transitional houses that would help us to better serve the families that we serve, especially if that house were to support longer stays for our Spanish speaking families that need additional on-site services and longer stays in our program while they seek legal status. So I think the embedded question is if this grant can be used towards capital projects.
Yeah, I can jump in here.
Sorry, I was thinking too hard about that.
No, it's totally fine. No, it has to, it depends. Based on what you're asking about purchasing property, it usually is restricted under the statute that we cannot do that. Unless, okay, Dimitri nodded too. As like we've gotten application like that in the past and checked with our legislative people on that. So that would not be allowed, unfortunately.
Thank you, Kaylin.
Next question from Terry Moore. Can you imagine that an innovative, culturally relevant food bank be eligible? This food bank is bringing innovative food lockers to various locations where customers can order food in multiple languages and pick up the food in food lockers 24/7. First offsite locker will be at a Pierce County library.
Wow. Another reason why libraries are my favorite place. Yes, I can imagine that. And the only stipulation is that it has to be connected to assisting families in the prevention of homelessness and having safe and stable housing. So it cannot just only be limited to culturally relevant food banks. It does have to be HMIS somewhere in that mix.
From Sophie Hoover, will organizations only be considered primarily serve immigrant and refugee families? My org is in line with the housing, healing, by and for focus, but does not primarily serve immigrants and refugees.
Can it? Is my first question. But then also I'm interested on like reading on what your org is doing in terms of housing, healing, and in those sectors, because that is what the grant strategy outlines. The focus is on immigrants and refugees, but again, we are hoping to select anywhere between 2 and 4 organizations, and I do think that they should reflect the myriad of communities that we have here in this landscape.
Will okay. Can I answer the question?
Yeah, go ahead.
I know when we talk about housing, a lot of time people, well, some people may think is having a stable housing, but will rental assistance and bill payment considered to be part of this?
So if the community organization has deemed rental assistance, and what was the other one?
Bills payment.
Bill payment in the strategy to prevent and keep families housed, like prevent homelessness and keep families housed. I mean, so long as that's the community strategy, in order to keep that family from experiencing homelessness, then it is supported. But if it's not within your strategy, then we'd have to have a conversation and figure out how that could be modified.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, a question from Eric Bewley. Of 5 strategic objectives listed in the RFP, is there an expectation that proposals will address 5? If not, will proposals that address more of the objectives typically be considered of more interest than proposals that only focus on one objective?
If your proposal includes all 5, wow. Hats off to you. I would love to be in that think room. Because as I was developing, I was like, wow, this is everything and the kitchen sink. It is a lot. And a lot can be done with every single strategy. So it really is led up to community orgs and how they're being informed by their community members to reach that strategy and to identify needs in community.
So just to be clear, it doesn't have to be all 5.
It doesn't have to be all 5. No.
Okay.
No. So it is, just to further speak on that. It's more of a representation of what can be done. Doesn't have to be done. And again, just zooming into what else could health look like? What else could healing look like? And Eric, I saw that you came off mute if you had another question.
Yeah, I was just curious, would a proposal that focuses on 2 or 3 typically be considered stronger than a proposal that just focuses on 1, or is focusing on 1 equally strong as addressing multiple strategies?
The focus that I would like to communicate is that is important is as long as the strategy is community informed and you are demonstrating a clear pathway to how to meet those community needs, that is what's going to be considered. So if it's like 3 for the sake of hitting 3 and not a very good projection of how this is going to meet clients' needs or community members' needs, then no, that the better result would be to exemplify how it is that community needs will be met and what input and how community orgs will show up in community.
Thank you.
Question from David Moser. If we were interested in providing eviction prevention rent assistance by BIPOGM households who are rent burdened and or have received eviction notices, would the expectation be that the healing activities component be provided to all households receiving financial assistance? Or would it be possible to provide financial assistance to those who choose not to participate in those activities?
I'm so sorry. Can you repeat that question?
Yes. So David's asking if they were interested in providing eviction prevention rental assistance to households of Black, Indigenous people of the global majority who are rent burdened and or have received eviction notices, would the expectation that they have to participate in the healing activities component, or would it be possible to provide that assistance to those who do not want to participate in those activities?
Yeah. I would say that that's really determined by community member needs and the community organization. So if your program requires folks to undergo through like some sort of reflective and healing process that is culturally competent to the community, then that's how it is. But if it's decided that like, hey, what is more important and what is more vital for this person's healing is to have this housing insecurity be turned into a stable housing. And then later on, if the option for them changes that they do want to participate in cultural healing or in competent, culturally responsive healing, then they are able to. I don't think that it should be dependent on when someone else's timeline of when healing should happen. Again, I leave that all to the community organization and their strategy and their program.
From Dirk Lum, my organization is a by and for org that provides nearly all of our housing and services to immigrants and refugees and other BIPOGM. Some of these are people who are homeless or recently were experiencing homelessness. Many others experience or experienced housing instability or community instability. Are services for both communities eligible and competitive, or just for the BIPOGM folks who are or very recently experienced homelessness?
And to make sure that I have full clarity on this question, is there what's the phrasing? If I'm understanding your question correctly, you serve both immigrants and refugees of the BIPOGM spectrum, and community is made up of that. So I don't see why you would have to separate who gets services. It's more of just like how, if that is who your community is made up of, and you are also serving immigrants and refugees of the BIPOGM community, then they would both be eligible. Like I don't see why it would be competitive unless that is the structure of your program.
Listen, I jump in here real quick.
Yeah.
Yeah. Derek, is this a question on the eligibility of the household depending on their housing status?
Hi everyone. No, it's not so much about housing. I guess it's a little bit about housing stats, but it's just demographically, our households that have recently experienced homelessness, or are currently homeless, are different than our households that have not had that experience but are experiencing housing instability. Or even if maybe they have experienced a form of homelessness, it's like a different type of, it's like more like maybe more of the couch surfing kind of homelessness and less of the currently on the street type of homelessness.
So I'll jump in here, and Atlas, I'll stop and you can cut in. Washington Families Fund does recognize that homelessness looks different per community. And so on the last piece you'd mentioned around their eligible housing status, we do facilitate what's called the McKinney-Vento definition of homelessness that includes couch surfing and doubled up individuals. You do not have to only be experiencing literal homelessness to qualify for this experience. So that's I guess responding to one part of your question. And I think I'll shut up and also invite Atlas to have any final thoughts if that's helpful.
Thank you, Dimitri. Yeah, so as Dimitri mentioned, actual homelessness is subjective, right? So to me, that I understand that as no, they do not have to be out on the street for the HUD definition of housing. We do subscribe to the McKinney-Vento.
Thank you, everyone. Very helpful.
Thank you.
There's just a couple more questions in the chat. Can folks co-write a grant with 2 orgs partnering? And can one org submit multiple applications?
Could
I
you,
will get that. Oh, go ahead,
oh, I'm
Kim.
sorry. I was gonna say, could the person who is asking about multiple applications define, like, are you submitting partnered with multiple organizations, or are you submitting 3 grants for your organization alone? Oh, I see in the chat. Oh,
From my understanding, like if they serve both families and youth and young adults, then they would be eligible to submit the strategy.
Liz, it's a little hard to hear you right now.
Oh, from my understanding, if the organization serves both youth and young adults and families, I understand it that they would be able to submit an application to each respective strategy.
be applicable. Yes, that is true. We have 3 sides of this grant. We have the families, which Atlas is focused on, and youth that Dimitri, who's been coming off mute as well, is focused on. I see that Rebecca wrote, we are a large organization, so we have multiple programs that could be applicable. I can jump in there. I would say that you should, if you are alone, if your organization should apply on each side once, unless you're like a contractor or thing like, or co-partnering with others and they've asked you to also apply, we would accept that. But where you're writing probably multiple organizational things, or multiple organizational applications, it would be unlikely we would grant to the same organization under the same side multiple times.
Thank you for that, Kaylin.
Then are people able to co-write grants? Like could 2 partner organizations write a grant, 1 application together? You might have answered that and I missed it, but.
What I understood Kaylin say was that if they have multiple programs that serve each respective strategy, they are welcome to apply once. And if they are being requested from an organization to assist in the submission of an application, then yes, but otherwise refrain from doing so is what I understood.
Yeah, sorry. And organizations, if they want to partner together, share the grant money, and submit, that's acceptable as well. We've done that where they're either contracted or they're co-grantees.
Thank you. And then I did get a direct message chat question that I want to read aloud. And it reads, you said that the focus is on immigrants and refugees. However, what if the majority you serve are Black, and in quotes, in parentheses, American descendants of slavery. And Charlena, I understand that as, I understand slavery as people being removed from where they were originally from and taken to somewhere in order to be exploited for their labor and their life. So that reads squarely within to like what we're looking for in my opinion.
I just wanted to back up to the co-writing grant one. I heard 2 different responses, so I just want to be clear that you can co-write a grant. Like that would be acceptable.
Yeah, if the other organization is inviting you and asking you to do so, that would be acceptable.
Okay. Okay, a few more questions have come in. Will there be guidelines provided for this funding that states the difference from CHG?
I can jump in here. Atlas.
Okay, I was gonna say off the top of my head, I'm not sure, but Dimitri, please jump in.
Yeah, it's a great question. The CHG is the Consolidated Homeless Grant. This is the primary funding source our state accesses for homeless stability supports. Yes, we do. We are a small and helpful and mighty team. And again, with Washington Youth and Families Fund being a very unique fund, we do like to provide supports to help organizations navigate the differences between different funding streams. So that's pretty much everyone on this call from the BC team's role is to support an organization in implementing their work that might either be woven in with other dollars or it might be unique to other dollars and other requirements. And so we can provide that support for sure.
Thank you, Dimitri.
Boop, boop, boop. Okay, from Nicole O'Connor, if an organization has multiple offices in the state, work mostly independently under the same 501c3, would more than one application be considered?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I guess my first thoughts are if it is one organization, would the body of work not, my assumption would be that it would be the same, just tailored to the community. That could be completely incorrect. So I guess I would need more information, but just by thinking about it, seeing that it is one name, I think we would only accept one application for a dedicated body of work. If they fall in line with families and youth and young adults, I don't see why you could not apply to both individually.
Okay, from Julio Rios. So their org is deeply committed to supporting families in need. As a faith-based organization, we operate with certain hiring preferences that align with our core values and mission. I want to ensure alignment and transparency from the outset. Could you please share more about the inclusivity and non-discrimination criteria for grant eligibility? We are keen to understand how we might align our practices with your expectations and participate in this program.
Julio, thank you so much for that question. So, could you please share more about the inclusivity and non-discrimination criteria for grant eligibility? Our community review panelist will be formed of people of lived experience and folks that maybe even have access to these needs, as well as people who manage these programs and are part of these programs. So the intention of this is to have, I believe, Dimitri, if you could help me out here, how many reviews are we gonna have? Anywhere from like 15 to 18, with the intention to really be reviewing and scoring these applications based off of whether or not the question was answered and if there is a clear understanding of what is being answered and a clear understanding of how it is that will be carried out. So in terms of inclusivity and non-discrimination, a vote or a scoring would not be appropriate based off of just like, I don't like their name, or, oh, I don't have any faith based ties and this makes me feel icky. Well, that's not something that we're scoring on. We're scoring on, have they answered the question? Are they responding to community? And do they have a clear understanding of how they're going to carry out those services?
Just to add in, we have worked with faith-based organizations in the past.
Okay, yeah, and if that was the question, thank you so much, Kaylin, for answering that. I didn't know if that was also kind of like what the question was also asking, like, will faith-based organizations be considered? So we have in the past, and then mostly it's going to depend on our community's needs being met and is the understanding there.
I'll add in here, in terms of our contracting phase, we do have a standard code of conduct that we expect folks to abide by. And so, again, without knowing a little bit more deeply, Julio, kind of how your organization is orienting to work, we do expect that organizations are in alignment with non-discriminatory practices in their organization. So that's something definitely to think about and consider. As a faith-based institution, I imagine y'all have navigated that with a lot of skill and prudence. And also as a housing-based institution, I also am confident y'all know how to navigate, how to be in alignment, such that we aren't reinforcing discrimination and not acceptance of folks into our system. So I will leave that there. And yeah, if there's more follow-up, certainly Atlas and I can support you in understanding where there might be conflict, so that you can really be thoughtful about your time in applying to this.
Thank you.
Thank you
I
so
really
much.
appreciate that.
One more question from the chat currently from Rebecca Dyer. If we currently have another pilot program through OHY, could we still apply for these funds to enhance the program through this RFP?
Yes, I believe so. We currently have grantees who also hold grants with OHY. I don't believe that they would conflict, and as long as it falls within the strategy and again, being on HMIS, there should be no issues.
Sorry, Atlas, can I jump in really quick?
I would
With
love
that?
it.
For that one in particular, just remember you do need to report separately on Washington Youth and Family Fund. So your financials need to be able to be reported back on specifically the Washington Youth and Family Fund, Family Fund dollars, as well as the clients that you're serving that are specifically Washington Youth and Family Fund. So often when we have programs that are like braided funding, we do sit down at the beginning and try to like outline some ways in which to make it clear about how you're reporting on Washington Youth and Family Fund versus how it might be reported back to OHY for their fund, for example.
Thank you so much for that distinction, Kaylin. And yes, the expectation would be on the organization to make sure that that funding is being tracked appropriately and that they have their own systems developed for that. We're able to guide and maybe connect you with professionals in that field if that is something that needs a little bit more building out. But it is something that has to be kept separate and tracked by the organization. Otherwise, we run into issues. And if this like little ping pong wasn't a better way to show y'all how it is that we work, like nothing is done within a vacuum. Because I want to make sure that we have all touch points and different types of perspective. A lot of my learnings, work, and outreach is done just like this, with my colleagues being like, okay, what am I missing? Oh, how can we best prepare these individuals for their goal? So I hope that y'all like to chat because we're an involved bunch. And with that, thank you so much for your time. If there are no questions, we're all good to go. And again,
Before we exit, I'm going to drop the link in again. We're going to create a frequently asked questions, incorporating a lot of these questions into the document and the recording of this session on this link that I'm going to drop real soon, so that you'll have access and if you need to share it. Where is it?
Thank you so much, Catherine. By the way, I was just about to say that and you just like swooped in. See, again, y'all, an involved bunch. Oh, I'm just waiting on that link. So
No, I was muted. I'm sorry. I had a whole thing. So here's the link, and this is for both strategies. If you're interested, please feel free to share it with other organizations that you work with. Yeah, this is where you'll find the information, and where we'll post the recording and the FAQ document.
And if along the way y'all have additional questions, my email is on this slide, as well as my phone number. So if you would rather pick up the phone and get a call, please do so. Again, thank you all so much for your time today and for sharing space. I look forward to receiving your applications.